The gavel felt like ice in Judge Anya Petrova's hand. Not because the courtroom was cold. It was always a little too warm, the old radiator in the corner of the St. Louis City Courthouse hissing softly. No, the wood, worn smooth by 1,000 nervous hands, just seemed to leach all the warmth right out of her. It was Monday, October 12th, 10:04 a.m. The air smelled like lemon polish and stale coffee. From her high bench, she could see the usual scene: the nervous defendant in his too-big suit, the bored jury, the reporters with their pens poised. It was day 3 of the State versus Martin Braxton, a dry embezzlement case involving misplaced pension funds. Just another Tuesday. She took a slow breath, the black silk of her robes rustling. "The court will hear the prosecution's next witness," she said, her voice calm and measured, filling the room. This was her domain. The polished oak, the state seal on the wall, the faint echo of every footstep on the marble floor. For 15 years, this had been her life. It was ordered. It was predictable. It was safe. Her eyes swept over the gallery, a sea of blurry faces, and then down to the defense table. That's when the crack appeared. Leo Sterling was standing, straightening his notes. He was the lead defense attorney, new to the city, known for being sharp and a little flashy. His suit was a deep charcoal, his tie perfectly knotted. As she looked at him, he glanced up. Their eyes met. It wasn't a long look. Just a second, maybe 2. But in that second, the steady hum of the courtroom faded. It wasn't about memory. They'd only met once before, briefly, at a legal conference in Chicago last April. It was about a feeling. A sudden, silent understanding that seemed to hang in the air between them, as real as the bench beneath her hands. Her fingers tightened around the gavel, her knuckles turning white. She quickly looked away, her heart doing a strange, clumsy thump against her ribs. The morning dragged on. Witnesses droned. Numbers were discussed. Anya kept her focus on the legal pad in front of her, taking precise notes. But she was hyper-aware of him. The smooth timbre of his voice when he objected. The way he'd run a hand through his dark hair when he was thinking. It was ridiculous. She was a 48-year-old judge, a widow for 7 years, a woman who prized control above all else. She wasn't some law school student with a crush. During the lunch recess, she retreated to her chambers, a quiet room lined with legal books. She unwrapped the turkey sandwich she'd brought from home but didn't eat it. Instead, she stared out the window at the grey October sky over downtown St. Louis. The clock on her wall ticked loudly in the quiet room. Asterisk tick. Tark. Tick dot asterisk. It counted away the seconds of her perfectly constructed life. She thought of that conference in Chicago, the rain streaking the windows of the hotel library. She'd been researching a point of procedure, and he'd been there, doing the same. They'd talked for maybe 20 minutes about judicial precedent. It was just shop talk. But it hadn't felt like shop talk. It had felt like a conversation, the first real one she'd had in years. A soft knock at the door made her jump. It was her clerk, Sarah, with a stack of files. "Everything okay, Judge Petrova? You seemed a little distant out there this morning." "Just a long weekend, Sarah," Anya said, forcing a smile. "Nothing a little coffee won't fix." The lie tasted bitter. The afternoon session was worse. Every time Leo stood, she felt a jolt. She found herself studying the way the light from the high courtroom windows caught the silver at his temples. She noticed a small, faint scar above his right eyebrow. She was cataloguing him, and she couldn't stop. During a particularly tedious exchange about financial audits, he caught her eye again and gave the smallest, almost imperceptible shake of his head, as if sharing a private joke about the dryness of it all. A smile threatened at the corner of her mouth. She pressed her lips together, hard. At 3 p.m., she called for a 15-minute recess. The courtroom erupted into the sound of shuffling papers and murmured conversations. As she stood to leave, his voice cut through the noise. "Your Honor." She paused. "Mr. Sterling." He took a few steps toward the bench, close enough that she could see the tired lines around his eyes. He offered a small, professional smile. "Your Honor looks tired." It's a long case for everyone." The words were simple, considerate even. But in the context of that shared glance, in the quiet intensity of his voice, they felt like a bolt of electricity. They weren't about the case. They were about her. She felt a flush creep up her neck. "The court appreciates your concern, counselor," she said, her judge voice firmly in place. "But I assure you, I am perfectly alert." She turned and walked out, the heavy door to her chambers swinging shut behind her, cutting off the sound of the courtroom. She leaned against it, closing her eyes. Asterisk, what are you doing? Asterisk, she asked herself. Asterisk, he's an attorney in your courtroom. Asterisk. The final hour was a blur. She adjourned at 4:30 p.m. sharp. Usually, she stayed late to review the next day's docket. Today, she gathered her things with unseemly haste. She needed air. She needed to get out of the building, away from the feeling that the walls were subtly shifting around her. The courthouse parking garage was quiet and dim, the concrete echoing with the distant sound of a car door slamming. The air was cool and smelled of damp concrete and exhaust. She clicked her key fob, and the lights on her sensible blue sedan flashed. She was just reaching for the door handle when a voice came from behind her. "Judge Petrova." She turned. Leo Sterling was there, standing beside a sleek, silver Audi. He wasn't smiling. The professional mask was gone. He looked as uneasy as she felt. The overhead fluorescent light buzzed faintly. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "the hearing is adjourned until tomorrow." "I know." He took one step closer. Not enough to touch, but enough that she could smell the scent of his rain-dampened wool coat, a clean, crisp smell like autumn leaves and coffee. He hadn't put his briefcase in his car. He was just standing there, holding it, as if he'd been waiting. The garage was utterly silent. No footsteps, no engines. Just the two of them and that buzzing light. He didn't say anything else for a long moment. He just looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw the same confusion, the same magnetic pull she felt. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. Then, he spoke. His voice was so low it was almost part of the garage shadows. "I can't stop thinking about that library." The words hung in the cool air. They weren't an invitation. They were a confession. And in hearing them, Anya made her own. She didn't answer. She didn't move. She just stood there, the cold metal of her car key biting into her palm. He didn't push. He simply nodded, as if she had spoken. Then he turned and walked toward the elevator bay at the far end of the garage. He didn't get into his car. He pressed the call button. The elevator doors slid open with a soft, metallic sigh, spilling a rectangle of yellow light onto the concrete floor. He stepped inside. He turned. And he held the door. He didn't gesture. He didn't say coming. He just stood there, holding the door open with his arm, his eyes fixed on hers across the shadowy distance of the garage. The elevator's interior light haloed him. It was the simplest, most dangerous question she had ever been asked. The choice was absolute. She could get in her car. She could start the engine, drive home to her quiet house, and tomorrow she could file a formal complaint with the Bar Association. That was the rules. That was the safe, predictable path. Or, she could walk across that cold concrete floor. She could step into that yellow light. Her feet seemed rooted to the spot. The moment stretched, thin and taut as a wire. Somewhere, water dripped, a slow, rhythmic tap-tap-tap counting down the seconds she had left to decide what kind of woman she really was. The key shook in Anya's hand, a tiny, frantic vibration against the silence of the car. For a full 10 seconds, it wouldn't find the slot. Asterisk click, scrape, click, scrape. Asterisk finally, it slid home. The engine turned over with a cough and a rumble, the sound unnaturally loud in the concrete cavern of the garage. She didn't look in the rearview mirror as she drove away. If she had, she would have seen the elevator doors, still open, the yellow light now empty, slowly starting to close. The next week passed in a blur of ordinary things, but each one felt wrapped in a strange, new layer of meaning. She presided over a small claims dispute about a damaged fence. She attended a judicial review meeting where the coffee was, as always, burnt and bitter. She bought groceries on a Thursday evening, pushing her cart slowly past the bright, cold vegetables. Normal life. But underneath it, a secret current was running. It announced itself in her body, not her thoughts. A dry, cottony feeling in her mouth every time the door to her courtroom opened. A sudden hollowness in her stomach when a tall figure walked in. It was the taste of metallic adrenaline, sharp on her tongue, when Leo Sterling rose to object. She'd listened to his voice, that smooth, confident baritone arguing a point of procedure, and her fingers would go numb where they held her pen. She wasn't thinking about the library in Chicago, or the garage. Her body was just reacting. As if it had heard a frequency her mind was trying desperately to ignore. The Braxton trial ground on. It was now October 26th, and a true autumn chill had settled over St. Louis. The trees outside the courthouse were skeletons draped in gold and crimson. Inside, the heat was cranked up, making the air thick. During a particularly tedious discussion of tax filings, Leo stood to challenge a document. As he spoke, he gestured with his right hand, and his eyes flicked to hers for less than a second. It wasn't a smile. It was just a look. A shared acknowledgement of the endless, dry numbers. In that moment, her heart didn't just beat faster, it seemed to stutter, like an engine missing a gear. She had to look down at her notes, her vision swimming slightly. Asterisk, this is professional asterisk, she told herself. Asterisk, this is absurd dot asterisk. But the line between professional and personal had begun to blur, and she was the one holding the eraser. It happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The trial had adjourned early. Back in her chambers, the rain streaked the windows, turning the city into a watercolor painting. Her official court email chimed. It was a message from Leo Sterling's law firm account. The subject line was, "Follow up on point of procedure from today's session." Her throat tightened. She opened it. The body of the email was all business. It cited a case, asterisk Henderson versus State asterisk, and posed a technical question about its application to a minor point from the day's testimony. It was perfectly reasonable. Any judge might get such an email. But the last line was different. It read, "I find myself revisiting the foundational texts lately. The clarity is helpful." Asterisk foundational texts dot asterisk the words from their conversation in the Chicago library. A password. A knock on a secret door. Her hands were cold. She read the line 5 times. Then, she made her first irreversible choice. She didn't reply from her official email. She closed the program. That evening, from her quiet living room, the only light from a single lamp, she took out an old, prepaid cell phone she'd once used for a community charity drive. It was a cheap, black plastic thing. Her thumbs, clumsy with nerves, typed out a new text message to the number she'd looked up in the Public Bar Association directory. Asterisk Henderson asterisk was superseded by asterisk Carson asterisk, she typed. Then she added, Chapter 12, not 7. She hit send before she could think. The reply came 27 minutes later. Of course. Thank you for the correction. The used bookstore on Locust Street has a good section on legal history. I was there just yesterday. It wasn't an invitation. It was a statement. A location. A time. Their first meeting was set for Saturday at 1 p.m., under the pretext of both browsing for the same obscure legal history volume. The book nook was a cramped, wonderful place that smelled of old paper, lemon oil, and dust. Sunlight slanted through the front window, illuminating millions of dancing dust motes. She saw him first, in the history aisle. He was wearing a simple grey sweater and jeans, looking utterly unlike the sharp-suited attorney in her courtroom. He was pulling a thick, green-bound volume from a high shelf. She walked over, her boot heels quiet on the worn wooden floor. She didn't say hello. She reached for a book next to the one he was holding, a biography of an old Missouri judge. Their hands didn't touch, but his sleeve, the soft wool of his sweater, brushed against the back of her wrist. It was the briefest contact, less than a second. A spark seemed to jump from that point of contact straight to her core. She froze, the book halfway off the shelf. He froze too. The whole world narrowed to that tiny point of warmth on her skin. The bustling street outside, the other browsers in the shop, the weight of her title, her robes, her entire careful life, it all just fell away. In that silent, sunlit aisle, there was only the smell of old books and the electric truth of that almost touch. They didn't speak. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, replaced his book, and walked to the front counter to buy nothing. She stood there for 5 full minutes, holding the biography, feeling the ghost of the wool on her skin, before she could make her legs move. After that, their affair was measured not in days, but in stolen, time-anchored moments. It was a universe parallel to her real life, existing in the cracks between her schedule. A 20-minute lunch break that stretched to 30, spent walking along the Mississippi riverfront, the wind whipping their words away, a full foot of space always between them. A 2 a.m. phone call on the prepaid phone, where they talked about everything except the law, childhood pets, worst vacations, the best kind of apple pie. His voice in the dark was a low hum that made her feel both deeply calm and wildly alive. They met in a park 2 towns over as the last of the autumn leaves fell. They walked on opposite sides of the path, like strangers who happened to be going the same way. They spoke without looking at each other, watching the brown, brittle leaves skitter and swirl around their feet. "It's like the whole world is unraveling," she said softly, watching a leaf crack apart in the wind. "Or being remade," he replied, his hands deep in his coat pockets. For 6 weeks, this was their life. A double life. Anya lived in a constant state of hyper-awareness. The taste of the coffee they'd shared from a paper cup at a remote gas station. The specific, clean scent of his soap. The way the late November light gilded the buildings downtown at 4 p.m., which was when they'd sometimes pass, separately, on opposite sidewalks, and share a single, fleeting glance that felt like a bolt of lightning. She felt more present in these secret moments than she had in years of her public life. She also felt a guilt so heavy it was a physical ache in her shoulders, a constant, sour note in the back of her throat. The Braxton trial was entering its final stages. On December 3rd, the prosecution called their last major witness, a nervous accountant from the pension fund. The questioning was technical, dense with figures. Anya felt a headache beginning to pulse behind her eyes. Then Leo stood for cross-examination. He was calm, methodical. He approached the witness with a quiet courtesy that disarmed the man. "Mr. Jenkins," Leo began, his voice like poured honey. "You've referenced Internal Audit Protocol A14 several times. Can you tell the court who must be physically present for that protocol to be properly initiated?" The witness blinked. "Well, the lead auditor and a senior manager." "And is their dual signature required on the initiation form?" Leo asked, leaning slightly on the jury box. "Yes, of course." Leo paused. He turned and picked up a single sheet of paper from his desk. He held it up. "Your Honor, I would like to enter Defense Exhibit 42. This is the initiation form for the audit in question, dated April 14th of last year." Anya motioned for the bailiff to bring it to her. She looked down. The form was crisp, official. It had one signature, the lead auditor's. The line for the senior manager was blank. A cold dread, colder than the ice that had been on her gavel, began to spread through Anya's chest. She knew this protocol. She'd overseen cases involving it before. Without that second signature, the entire audit chain of custody was broken. Any evidence from it was potentially inadmissible. It was a foundational flaw. A rookie mistake by the prosecution. And she had missed it. Completely. She looked from the form to Leo's calm, expectant face. He had known. He had built his entire defense around this moment, this one missing signature. The prosecution was sputtering, asking for a recess, their case crumbling before them. In that moment, sitting high on her bench in her black robes, Anya Petrova realized the terrible truth. Their forbidden affair hadn't truly begun with a whisper in a dark garage. It had begun right here, in this very courtroom, weeks earlier. It had begun the second she let her professional focus waver, the moment she allowed her eyes to see the man before the attorney. Her distraction, her secret joy, had blinded her. She had compromised not just her ethics, but her sharpest skill. She had failed in her most sacred duty, to see the facts clearly. Leo won the motion. The evidence was thrown out. The prosecution's case, built like a house of cards, collapsed. The judge declared a mistrial. Martin Braxton, a man who may very well have been guilty, walked out of the courtroom a free man, a smirk on his face. In the ringing silence after the gavel fell, Leo gathered his papers. As he passed her bench on the way out, he didn't look triumphant. He looked at her, his eyes holding a mixture of sympathy and something else, something like complicity. He stopped for just half a second, leaning close as if to pick up a dropped pen. His whisper was so soft only she could hear it. "You taught me that." Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the sudden, hollow quiet of the courtroom. The words echoed in the space he left behind. "You taught me that. He was right." She had, in a lecture at that Chicago conference, emphasized the importance of challenging procedural foundations. She had been his teacher. And now, she had been his unwitting accomplice. The warmth of their secret meetings turned to ash in her memory. What had felt like a connection now felt like a trap, and she had built every part of it herself. The question hanging in the air now was terrifying. Had her heart just cost the truth its day in court? The winter rain didn't fall so much as smother the city. It was a steady, grey curtain outside the courthouse windows, blurring the lines of the buildings and the people below into shapeless ghosts. From her bench, Anya could barely make out the red taillights of cars on Tucker Boulevard, bleeding colour into the wet gloom. Inside, the air was too warm and too still, smelling of wet wool and regret. It was January 15th. The holidays had come and gone in a silent, tense blur, and a new year had begun, but it felt no different from the old one. Just colder. The Braxton mistrial had left a stain. It was a quiet thing, not a splashy scandal in the papers, but a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the courthouse. The other judges in the cafeteria spoke in slightly hushed tones when she walked by. Her clerk, Sarah, had started double-checking her own work with a nervous diligence that spoke volumes. Anya's own chambers, once a place of quiet authority, now felt like a glass box. She could feel eyes on her, imagined or real, questioning her judgment. It started with a simple memo, delivered by interoffice mail on a Tuesday morning. It was on the official, cream-coloured stationery of the Judicial Conduct Board. It requested, in polite and vague terms, a routine review of several recent high-profile case files, including State versus Braxton for procedural consistency. The word routine was underlined in her mind, screaming. There was nothing routine about it. 3 frozen months passed. The investigation was a shadow following her. It had no face, no name. It was just a presence, a chill in the air. She'd get a call asking for a clarifying detail about a hearing date, an email requesting copies of her notes. Every ping of her computer, every ring of her office phone, made the muscles in her neck tighten into knots. She stopped meeting Leo entirely. The prepaid phone lay silent and dead in the bottom drawer of her desk at home, a guilty secret she couldn't bring herself to touch or throw away. Their communication became a void, a space filled only with the memory of his last whisper. You taught me that. She saw him once, from a distance, crossing the street in front of the courthouse. He was just a figure in a long coat, his shoulders hunched against the wind. He didn't look up. The space between them, which had once crackled with electricity, now felt like a mile-wide chasm of cracked ice. She wasn't sure if she could cross it, or if she even wanted to. The warmth they'd shared had been the kind that melts the ice you're standing on. The lowest point came on a Thursday night in late February. The city was locked in a deep freeze, the kind that makes the old building groan and pop. Anya had stayed late, as she often did now, using the empty courthouse as an excuse to avoid her empty house. She was poring over a complex zoning case, trying to lose herself in the dry details of property lines and municipal codes. But the words swam on the page. Her eyes were tired, gritty from lack of sleep. She pushed back from her desk, the chair rolling with a squeak that was too loud in silence. She walked to the small, full-length mirror mounted on the back of her chamber's door, the one she used to check her robes before entering the courtroom. She looked at her reflection in the dim light of her desk lamp. The woman who looked back was a stranger. She saw the tired lines fanning from eyes that seemed somehow duller, the new streaks of silver in her chestnut hair that she'd stopped bothering to cover. She saw the perfectly pressed black robe, the symbol of everything she had built. But she didn't see a respected judge. She saw a liar. She saw a hypocrite in a costume. The face in the mirror was the face of someone who had traded her most cherished principle, clarity, truth, for a handful of secret, stolen moments that now felt like a dream she couldn't quite remember. This was her mirror moment. Not a dramatic scene, just a tired woman alone in a quiet room, finally seeing the truth she'd been running from. The impossible choice came to her a week later, not with a bang, but with a quiet conversation. Leo had managed to get a message to her, not through the dead phone, but through the only safe channel left, the law. He filed a standard motion for clarification in a closed case, and in the required copy sent to her chambers, a single line was highlighted in yellow. A time and a place, the Art Museum Sculpture Garden, Sunday at 10 a.m. She went, her heart a trapped bird in her chest. The garden was deserted, the sculptures covered in white tarps for the winter, making them look like lonely, frozen ghosts. He was there, by the frozen reflection pool, his breath making little clouds in the air. He looked older, wearier than the man in the bookstore. "They're going to suspend you," he said without preamble, his voice flat. "It might be 6 months, it might be a year. But they'll find something. A lapse in judgment. They have to." She just nodded, the cold seeping through the soles of her boots. "I've been offered a position," he continued, staring at the iced-over pool. "A partnership in a firm in Singapore. It's a fresh start. A big one." He finally turned to look at her. "If I go, if I put an ocean between us, the investigation loses its teeth. It becomes a story about an overworked judge and a tricky attorney who left the country. There's no they're there anymore. You could keep your seat. Your reputation, it would heal, in time." The wind picked up, whistling through the skeletal trees. It was the first option. A clean, brutal cut. An end. Or, he said, and the word hung between them, heavier than the winter sky. Or, you could request a voluntary recusal from all corporate cases. You could stay on the bench, but in a limited capacity. We could try to be careful. To see if this, he gestured weakly between them, can exist in the real world. The second option. A life of constant hiding, of sideways glances and coded messages, of loving in the shadows and presiding in the light. A life where every day in her courtroom would be a reminder of the line she was walking. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. "We could just stop lying," she said, her voice hollow, the words swallowed by the vast, cold garden. He was silent for a long time. Then he took a step closer. He didn't touch her. He just looked at her with a sadness so deep it felt like its own kind of winter. "We've always been lying, Anya," he said softly. "Even to ourselves. We lied that it was just a connection. We lied that it wouldn't cost anything. We lied that we could control it." His words were the final crack in the ice she was standing on. They were the truth, plain and unvarnished and brutal. And then, as she stood there in that frozen garden, Anya realized the most painful truth of all. The whisper in the garage, the one that had felt like an invitation, like a thrilling secret, it was never any of those things. It had been a trap. But not a trap he had set for her. A trap she had built for herself, brick by brick, with every rationalization, every longing look, every choice to put her own wants above her duty. She had walked right into it, believing she was stepping towards light, when all along she was closing a door on the person she used to be. She didn't answer him about Singapore. She didn't choose. She just turned and walked back across the gravel path, the sound of her footsteps the only noise in the world. The question wasn't about him, or love, or geography anymore. The real question, the one that echoed in the empty spaces he left behind, was far simpler and much more terrifying. Who was she going to be now? The judge who built the trap, or the woman strong enough to break out of it? The path ahead was dark, but for the first time, she was starting to see it clearly. And sometimes, seeing the hard road is the first, real step toward finding your way home. The emerald silk of her dress whispered against her skin as she walked into the grand ballroom of the Jefferson Hotel. It was the night of the annual Judicial Gala, March 21st, a signal that spring was trying to push through the last of winter's grip. The room was a swirl of black tuxedos and glittering gowns, the air rich with the scent of perfume, roasted meat, and the fragrant, waxy smoke from 100 candles in the crystal chandeliers. A string quartet played something light and classical in the corner. Everyone was here: judges, attorneys, city officials, all laughing and chatting under the soft, golden light. It was a picture of polished success. Anya wore the dress he'd once said reminded him of her eyes. It was her armor now. She moved through the crowd with a calm smile, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries about the unseasonably warm weather. Her hand was steady. Her voice was clear. To anyone watching, Judge Petrova was in her element. But inside, a quiet, fierce fire had been lit. The woman who had stood frozen in the sculpture garden was gone. In her place was someone who had finally stopped running from her own flaws. Her flaw was that she was a master of perception, of building a narrative the court would believe. For months, she had used that skill to build a lie for two people. Now, she would use it to build a painful, necessary truth for one. The transformation had begun in the stark, quiet days after the garden. She stopped thinking about love, or loss, or loneliness. She started thinking like a judge again. She looked at the facts of her own situation with a cold, analytical eye. The investigation was a threat. Leo's departure was a possibility. Her own feelings were a complicating variable. She needed a ruling. And to get one, she needed to present a case. She requested a private meeting with Eleanor Vance, the head of the Judicial Conduct Board. They met on a Tuesday afternoon in Eleanor's office, a room that smelled of lemon-wood polish and strong tea. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, painting stripes on the Persian rug. Eleanor was in her 60s, with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness. "Anya," Eleanor said, gesturing to a chair. "This is informal. For now." Anya didn't sit. She placed a single, thin folder on Eleanor's desk. "I know why I'm here, Eleanor. The Braxton trial." Eleanor's expression was unreadable. "Procedural irregularities have been noted." "I noted them too," Anya said, her voice even. "After the fact. I was distracted. The prosecution's case was a house of cards, and I missed a foundational flaw. That is my error. My lapse." She was using her flaw, her understanding of how stories are built and broken, as a weapon. She was prosecuting herself before anyone else could. "I've prepared a full analysis of my own oversights, tied to caseload volume and personal fatigue following the 7th anniversary of my husband's passing last fall." It was a fact, woven into a narrative. It was human, it was understandable, and it was not a lie about the grief, only about its cause. Eleanor opened the folder, scanning the pages. "This is remarkably thorough self-critique." "It's my responsibility," Anya replied. "So is proposing a remedy. I am requesting a voluntary, 12-month recusal from all corporate and complex financial cases. I will oversee family, probate, and small claims during that period. I will also mentor 2 new clerks to pass on the lessons of my own fatigue." It was a brilliant, brutal offer. It was a punishment she designed herself. It saved her seat but caged her authority. It admitted failure while demonstrating control. It turned her weakness into a display of strength. Eleanor leaned back, steepling her fingers. And the role of Mr. Sterling? His timing in discovering that missing signature was fortuitous. This was the cliff's edge. Anya didn't blink. Mr. Sterling is a skilled attorney who did his job. My distraction is not his fault. He was simply the catalyst that revealed it. The word *catalyst* was chosen with precision. It was neutral, professional. and it was the match that would burn the last bridge. She saw the understanding dawn in Eleanor's eyes. The board would accept this. A judge taking noble, painful responsibility was a better story than a messy, unprovable scandal. "I will present this to the full board," Eleanor said finally. "I believe they will see it as a prudent solution." The meeting was over. Anya had won. She had saved her career. And she had never felt more like she had lost everything. The gala was the final act. She knew he would be there. She needed him to be. She saw him across the ballroom near the towering ice sculpture that was slowly melting into a silver tray. He was watching her, a glass of champagne untouched in his hand. His eyes tracked her in the emerald dress, and she saw not anger, but a deep, wounded confusion. The confrontation happened not with shouts, but in a hushed torrent on a secluded balcony overlooking the hotel's garden. The music from inside was a muffled whisper here. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and early hyacinths. "Singapore?" she asked, leaning on the cold stone railing. "I leave in 3 weeks," he said, his voice tight. "The offer is solid. But I didn't think you'd make your move without me." It wasn't a move, Leo. It was a verdict. He turned to her, his face pale in the moonlight. "You spoke to Vance. You offered me up as a catalyst. You poisoned my reputation here to inoculate yours." "I stated a fact," she said, the fire inside her making her words crisp, clear. "Your presence was the catalyst for my distraction. Telling the truth isn't poisoning. It's just the truth. The thing we've been avoiding." He flinched as if she'd struck him. "So this is it? You sacrifice us on the altar of your bench." "There is no us." The words came out sharper than she intended, carried on a wave of long-suppressed anguish. There was a fantasy. A beautiful, heartbreaking fantasy that started in a library and ended in a mistrial. Us cannot exist in the real world. Us is what almost broke the one thing in my life that is real, my purpose. He stared at her, and she saw the last of his hope fracture. "You're judging us, too," he said, the accusation hanging in the night air. And she was. She was presiding over the case of Anya Petrova versus her own heart, and she had finally reached a decision. "Yes," she whispered, "and I fined for the court." The silence between them was absolute, filled only by the distant city sounds. He looked at her for a long moment, as if memorizing the lines of her face in the emerald dress under the moonlight. He didn't say goodbye. He just gave a slow, defeated nod, turned, and walked back through the French doors into the glittering noise of the ballroom. She stayed on the balcony, letting the cool air dry the single, stubborn tear that escaped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She let it fall. Inside, the clock began to chime midnight, each deep, resonant gong marking the end of something. Asterisk bong. Bong. Bong dot asterisk. When the last chime faded, she took a deep, shuddering breath that felt like the first real breath she'd taken in months. The weight was still there, but it was different now. It was no longer the terrifying weight of a secret about to be discovered. It was the heavy, solid weight of a choice she had finally made for herself. She straightened her shoulders, the silk of the dress whispering its approval. She turned her back on the dark garden and faced the bright, noisy ballroom. The path ahead was lit now, not by forbidden whispers, but by the clear, hard light of a truth she could finally bear. And sometimes, walking into that light, even when it shows the scars, is the bravest step a person can take. The gavel was the same. Its smooth, worn wood, darkened in just one spot from the oil of 1,000 palms, fit perfectly in the curve of Judge Anya Petrova's hand. But the ache it left there was new, a permanent, dull throb in her joints that spoke of a long summer's worth of rulings. It was August 7th. The courtroom fans whirred overhead, struggling against the thick Missouri heat that pressed against the high windows. The case was a simple, sad one, a young couple dissolving their marriage, arguing quietly over a dining table set and custody of a nervous-looking terrier named Benny. Anya listened, her face a mask of calm attention. Her hair, tied in its usual precise bun, now held more silver than chestnut, streaks of frost woven through the dark. She wore her robes like she always had, but they hung on her a little differently, as if her shoulders had learned to carry a new, quieter kind of weight. She'd been back on the bench for 4 months, strictly family and probate cases as per her agreement with the Judicial Conduct Board. No more corporate dramas. No more high-stakes financial battles. Just the raw, human heartbreak of people figuring out how to untangle their lives. A new attorney was speaking for the wife. He was young, maybe 30, with an earnest face and a passion that made him lean forward as he talked. "Your Honor, my client simply wants what's fair," he said, his voice rising with a familiar, fervent cadence. It was a tone that spoke of believing utterly in the story you were telling. The sound of it, that particular passionate rhythm, caught Anya off guard. For a single, suspended second, the humid courtroom seemed to tilt. Her breath hitched, a ghost of a tremor passing through the hand that held her pen. Then, just as quickly, it stilled. She looked down at her notes, the neat lines of her handwriting steady and sure. The moment passed, leaving only the faint scent of old wood and the whisper of the turning fan. "The court understands, Counselor," she said, her voice clear and cool, like water over stones. "But we are here to determine what is equitable under the law, not just what is desired. Please proceed." A year had passed since the whisper in the garage. 13 months since a choice in an elevator shaft changed everything. The investigation by the Judicial Conduct Board had concluded with a quiet, formal letter of reprimand and the acceptance of her self-imposed limitations. The legal community, for the most part, had moved on. Judge Petrova was considered diligent, perhaps a bit more reserved than before, a dedicated public servant who had weathered a minor storm. The story of the catalyst attorney who had left for Singapore was just a piece of old gossip, rarely mentioned. She'd heard, through the careful, distant grapevine of the courthouse, that Leo Sterling had indeed taken the position. He had left in April. She never sought confirmation. She didn't look for news. His absence was a space in the world she had learned to walk around, like a familiar piece of furniture that was no longer there. You stop reaching for the light switch on a wall that's been repainted. The scene in the courtroom was a direct echo of that first day, the day of the Braxton trial. The same bench, the same robes, the same act of presiding. But everything was transformed. Her focus was absolute, a laser beam. She saw every nuance in the couple's body language, heard every tremor in their voices. She was present in a way she hadn't been for a long, long time. This was no longer just a job. It was a penance and a rediscovery. She was here, fully here, for the woman crying softly in the gallery, for the confused terrier waiting in someone's car. This was her purpose, reclaimed. Later, in her chambers, the late afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, painting prison bar shadows across the worn, green carpet. The room was tidy, spare. A few legal journals, a photograph of her and her late husband from a hiking trip years ago, a thriving peace lily on the windowsill that Sarah, her clerk, insisted on watering. The young attorney's voice echoed in her memory. Asterisk, I object, Your Honor. Asterisk, he'd said it with such fervor during the hearing. She had sustained the objection, her reasoning flawlessly cited from the bench. It was the right call. She sat at her desk, the surface clear except for a single case file. She needed a paperclip. She pulled open the bottom desk drawer. Inside, next to a spare pair of reading glasses and a box of forgotten business cards, it lay. The prepaid phone. A cheap, black plastic rectangle, its screen dark and blank. A fossil from another life. She didn't pick it up. She didn't turn it on. She didn't throw it away. She simply looked at it, lying there amidst the mundane office supplies. It wasn't a symbol of love lost, or of a thrilling secret. It was a paperweight holding down the memory of a person she used to be, a woman so lonely she mistook a spark for a lifeline, so scared of her own quiet life that she risked everything that truly mattered. The weight of the silence in the room was profound. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a full one. It held the murmur of the departing couple from her courtroom, hopefully finding a path forward. It held the quiet pride of a day's work done with integrity. It held the ache of a lesson learned too hard, and the solid ground of a self finally forgiven. She closed the drawer. The soft asterisk thud asterisk was the only sound. She turned her chair and looked out the window. The sun was lower now, gilding the rooftops of St. Louis in warm, forgiving light. The shadows of the blinds stretched long across her floor, but they no longer looked like bars. They just looked like shadows, patterns of light and dark that you could simply stand up and walk out of. She had walked out. It had been the hardest journey of her life, and she had walked it alone. But she had arrived somewhere new. Not at happiness, maybe, not in some simple, storybook way, but at peace. At a quiet understanding that the most important court she would ever preside over was the one inside her own heart, and that today, like yesterday, and hopefully like tomorrow, she had ruled with honesty. And sometimes, that is the most uplifting message of all, that we can lose our way in the darkness, we can fracture almost everything we hold dear, but if we are brave enough to face the truth of our own story, we can always find our way back to solid ground.